Thank you. First of all, I feel tremendously happy to see Professor Ashi Tripathi and Professor Mishra, two of my teachers. One, towards the back end of our PhD work, Mishra ji joined the Department of Psychology, and Arvind and me were sort of outcasts in the department, and because our thinking was not very conventional in the way the discipline was. In fact, even we continue to share this thought. Many young students are here. I'm sure you're in BA. I said, any brilliant mind, if you happen to join psychology honors course or MA in psychology, if you don't get depressed within 2 semesters, there's something wrong with you. And I think that depression has made us what we are. And Mishra ji has been one of that teachers for us. I remember that hours of, after the office hour, we used to hang out. And in fact, many students laugh when I say a phrase which I learned from him. When I have a very late evening discussion with my student, I say, "Chalo, dukaan band kar lete hain, we're late ho gaya." That's a phrase that Mishra ji used to tell us. And Professor Tripathi, I was reminding him when I presented one of my first, as a young scholar, I presented a seminar which was on cognitive psychology. If I remember, I presented a paper and it was well received. Just before that seminar, Professor Tripathi came to our department to give lectures, and I was arguing with him on identity and social psychology. Then he sent me an article. I think one of the authors was ESK, Ghosh, Professor Ghosh's article. It was amazing to see an MA student receiving an article from Allahabad in post, because he said, there's a writing, you must read it. And it was an inspiration for the teachers to get involved with almost an insignificant member of a crowd who raised a question and still remember and send me back that article. These are sweet moments in my life now that I realize that we are getting old. Both the sirs are retired now, and we can think about our retirement very shortly also in that sense. And thank you, Dr. Tiwari, for inviting me here. I told Arvind, I said, he hasn't called me up anything. Then he said, he told me. This is how he takes advantage of me, he said. Well, he has already told him that you should go, kind of thing. So anyway, I would try to do in a couple of things, which is, the first is a traditional, most scholars tend to do this, and I think it is required to do it. Some of the key concepts that we have been throwing up here, what does it mean? At least, how do I understand these terms? That's the first thing. And the second one, a fourth category which was introduced for this session, is the idea of the nation state. And the last one is, I would also address, which is a very passionate question for me, what psychology is all about. And Arvind has already told you that I have been trained in psychology right from my BA till my PhD, and I taught psychology for around about 4.5 years. And after that, my major chunk of work is in history and political science, and for the last 12 years, I've been teaching sociology. 2 disciplines where I have never had any training. I have no whatsoever training in sociology, whatsoever training in political science, but most of my works are cited by these disciplines now. And it's also an irony of my life that among all the PhD theses that I have examined in my life, till date, majority of them were from political science, followed by history, followed by English literature, and there is only one PhD thesis that in my life, around over 24 years of my career, that I've examined. That's what. But many friends said that I have a psychological inflection in the way I talked about things. And what does that mean? Let me start with this one. There was a lovely posture by Henry Tarsfield in social psychology, one of the very provocative statement. He said, what is social in social psychology? Incidentally, I'm going to give a lecture in this Friday, next coming Friday, on the refresher course on the ontology of the social. So this question of what is social in social psychology. I'll cut a long story short and give you an immediate example. Just close your eyes and think about this room. try to think about this room, sense this room, without allowing any words to appear in your mind. It's not possible. Mind is not empty. It is inhabited by words. It is through these words that we make sense of the world. Okay? Now, second part, which you must be aware in cognitive psychology, especially in social cognition. If I extend this example with another, if I say, if you try to think and if you think that you can think about the world without any words, it will sound so jadak to me. Now, I just said it sounds jadak to me. What does it mean? Probably you won't understand, because jadak is a word I have just coined. That means for a language to be a language, a word to be a language, a meaning, to acquire a meaning for communications, it is an inter-individual phenomenon. It has to be understood at least by another human being. So therefore the conclusion is that language is not intra-individual but inter-individuals. Now if you understood these two positions together, then you know what your consciousness, your mind, or the psychology that we talk about is deeply, deeply rooted in social interactions. One school of thought is called symbolic interactionism. This idea that our sense of self is deeply rooted in interaction is there in most of the theories in psychology too. For instance, in the Ericksonian paradigm, when he defines personal identity as something that which requires, within quote, constant reaffirmation by the significant others. So take, for example, your name, say, for a moment, your name is Sunita. And your teacher started saying it that, Sunny, why you are so sad? And you say, sir, my name is not Sunny. It keeps on referring to it, and you turn to your friend who's sitting next to it and say, why sir is calling me Sunny? And the friend said, what's wrong, Sunny? I said, what's happening? You go out, everybody started calling you Sunny, then you take up your mobile phone, call up your parents, and said, Mama, something's happened in college today, everybody's calling me Sunny. Are Sunny beta, kya hua usme, kya garbad hai? Now the point is, if you are not getting this constant reaffirmation by the others, you will not be able to retain that you are Sunita. That's a simple example to tell you that when Erickson says that our identity is required or founded upon this not only interaction but also constant affirmation by others. Now, if you see in this format, this is what social psychology as I understand at one deeper level. The fact that you don't understand the world without words, and words are socially created through human interaction, and our individual sense of self itself is socially rooted. Whether it is in the psychoanalytical tradition, you understand it, or you think in theories like symbolic interactionism. For that matter, your mental life, if you look at Vygotsky's work, he will tell you that it is nothing but the internalization of the social relations, a position which was articulated before him by Karl Marx. You know, it is not the consciousness which determines your social being, but it is your social being which determines your consciousness. A famous quote by Karl Marx. And you know Lev Vygotsky works in the Soviet Union, the then communist country, and most of his theory is informed by Marxists. And I was told by a reviewer when I read it that earlier translation work of Vygotsky in English did not have any reference to Marx. Although in his original Russian writing, there are a lot of reference to Karl Marx's position, because in the West, those days there was Cold War, and they removed whenever Marx comes in. So if you understood this part, then I can talk about these three things: globalization and diversity and equality. Then I'll refer to the last part. So if you understood this, what is psychology that you are studying? What do we mean by psychology? You can understand that how we are socially embedded. And does it mean that everything is socially determined? Not really. Because there is an interpretive space within us which invoke another concept called agency. We are not like stone rolling down though Benedict Spinoza tries to ridicule this position in his famous example on rolling stone. If a stone is conscious of itself, then he will think exactly like the human beings, that he is rolling precisely because he likes to roll it down. So he has the theory about against free will. But we know that we have a free will, in, so to speak. We are not like machines. We make choices. We react and respond. And therefore, whatever society, you keep on interpreting it. For example, what is love? When you fall in love with a man or a woman, it's not going to be exactly the same for everybody. You will have your own personalized interpretation of that man and what constitutes love for you at that moment. So we are not completely, otherwise all of us would have been identical blocks if society completely determined us. So the second question that you must retain is this notion of agency, which will come in the last part when I say about the challenge. What is the question of agency? I'll come to that. Now briefly, globalization. As a concept in social sciences, as is understood, normally it is understood initially as the movement of capital and movement of labor. That people move from one place to the other, and the money was transferred from India during colonialism, colonial time. They have extracted all our wealth and taken there, and people from Bihar and Chota Nagpur area were taken out for tea plantation and railway works everywhere. Africans were lifted from this place to America and so on. So they are movement of man. That's what in social science language we say movement of labor. Another is movement of capital, and that used to be the foundational way of understanding globalization in the early part of 1990s, when global capital started coming in, opening Hyundai and Honda and Duster, all kinds of foreign companies are investing. So it's a movement of capital, and they have their workers coming here, Indians going on IT sector in US and so on. So that's what we initially thought, that's a globalization. But here is another position on this by a well-known sociologist called Anthony Giddens. And he says that movement of capital and labor had happened before as well, during the earlier part of modernity, in colonial imperial expansion. But why we are calling this as globalization now only? It could be understood in two senses. One is the intensity has increased, that movement and capital has increased is one part. But this is not good enough to sustain the idea of globalization. So Anthony Giddens suggests that globalization that we are referring to is uniquely marked, especially since 1960s, the advent of technology of the satellite. When globally it was integrated, the information flow was integrated. So what happened is, if you are living in a village, for example, you will know exactly, Ramu kaka ka beti kya kar raha hai, iska pasand kya hai, everything you seem to know everything. It's a deeply personalized, like a village. Now what happened is, since the satellite inventions, we seem to be living in a global village exactly in the same way. If something had happened in Vietnam or in Brazil or in the US, we immediately feel, we see the experience. So it's become part of our experiential world. And therefore, this form is what people call it globalization, uniquely marked out, which was absent during those 17th century or 18th century notion of movement of capital and capital. So this integration has created a consciousness, a flow of information, an awareness where we seem to inhabit like a village, in a similar village. That's the term called global village. And just as you travel from one part of the village to another, unlike moving from one village to a far-off village, or share jana hai, you prepare a day before, that kind of thing. So movement within the village is faster, easily accessible. In a very similar sense, today when we say global village, our accessibilities have increased. There was an aeroplane called Concorde, which used to fly from Paris to New York within 3 hours. Otherwise, a normal airline takes around about 8 to 9 hours. Okay? Take for me, when I was a student, when I traveled from Imphal to Delhi, there was 3 flights, Air India, in a week. Okay, so what happened is that flight comes from Imphal to Guwahati, Guwahati to Bagdogra, Bagdogra to Patna, Patna to Lucknow, Lucknow to Delhi. So I started my flight around 10 in Imphal. I'll end up in Delhi around 7, 8. Today, I can go in the morning, give a lecture in Manipur universities and catch a flight and come back in Delhi. There are 7 flights operating between Imphal and Delhi. The movement has become very different, you know, the accessibility, like the movement within the village. And telephone, I don't know how many of you are aware, there used to be something called trunk call. You will see in all Hindi movies. So I'll ask them that I want to talk to my parents, that they fix it at 7:30, morning mein book karne padte the. Then they will call me up at 7:30, line connect ho gaya, we talk. Then comes during our MA or PhD day, this coin dal dal ke na, we used to ring, that was in Vijayanagar, and most students tend to call up their families after 11, because they are concessional rate at that time. Now you have mobile. My privacy is gone. Whether I am in the bathroom, whether I am in the classroom, people will call me up. I just switch it off. You see, this is communication. You understand what I mean to suggest is, globalization and the village is that our thinking, our experiences become in that global setup, and then our movement has become faster, so intensity of the movement of capital and labor has increased, and our sense is like a village. That's what globalization is today. Now, what does it create for us? It's linked to the second concept called diversity. You know, if you live in the village, if you say, think about a particular community, if you only experience your community, there are certain moral frame of reference. There are certain values and belief system which guide you. Larki aise nahi karte, ladka aise karte, mama ho to aisa karna chahiye, uncle hai to aisa karna chahiye, shaadi mein aise karna chahiye. There are certain sets of rule. Okay? So a belief system and moral order was singular for you. What globalization has done across the globe is the making that singularity into plural. So you know very well that the bahu and the father-in-law can have a champagne on the pool side, and she can be wearing a bikini, and you know, the brother-in-law, everybody can watch and do together, because he said it. In some society that's allowed. In our society, you can't even think about that. You see, that's why for our behavior, again psychology, the way you behave, how to behave, what makes you behave, what is your motive, there's a plurality of values and plurality of beliefs. So diversification of our frame of reference would also mean the diversification of our patterns of behavior. That's what we need to understand when we think about globalization's impact. It is called plurality of value system, plurality of belief system, and therefore it gives every individual a choice to behave in a particular manner, not according to one frame of reference. Now you see school and colleges when the girls should not come to college wearing a jean, you must have heard about it, right? And ladki should not go out of the 9 ke baad hostel se bahar nikalna nahi chahiye. Or for example, you know, JNU kind of campus is too liberal, and that's why some people get all the more disturbed. So you have co-ed hostel when the guys and the boys and girls stay in the same hostel. And when the girls walk around in the campus in 11 and 12, ladki aise kaise ghum rahe hai raat ko? So because you have a moral value about what girls should or should not do, but there's a different frame of reference. That's why they started doing it differently. So the diversity is nothing but at one level, plurality of values, beliefs, and therefore behavioral patterns. One part of the diversity is also globalization has brought in is this diversity of institutions. Now there was a time, many of you, I'm pretty sure the students, you may not know this, we are sort of brought up with one airline, Indian Airline. We had one television called Doordarshan. You have to see Chitrahar, Wednesday 8, everybody waited for that. Or you have a soap opera, something like Hum Log. You know, you have a very, after that what happened? So many channels, you don't even know how many channels are there today. Okay? And so therefore there's a diversification. Airline, you know, you have Indian Airline and whatnot, Indigo and Kingfisher. Kingfisher's dead, huh? What is that? Air Asia. So many flights you have. So like this, Shivnagar University, Ashoka University. There are various forms of colleges and institutions. So these also produces and strengthen diversity at one level, because each one of them tend to have a different style and approach. That is the notion of diversity that you have. The last one is equality. It's a very problematic concept, normally rooted in liberalism in the West. You know, the phrase is something like this. If you see, it is the first article of the French Revolution's Declaration. The first article says that you must have heard about French Revolution. It's the Declaration's article number 1 of that French Declaration says, all men are born free and equal in rights. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that you are same, you are similar. It means in the eyes of the law, and when you claim a right, that, you know, I must be treated with respect. This, everybody is equal in that. That's what it means. They are equal in rights. You know, you cannot just insult me. I am a human being, you must. That's why Dalits, women, and everybody started asserting. So that's a peculiar part of modernity which was brought about by Western civilizations. This notion of liberalism and right-based discourse. Today, we all talk, it's my life. You must have heard that famous song by Bon Jovi's, that Western number, It's My Life. And there is Mehna's, there was one singer, pop singer some years back. She also had Mehu, as is, you know. So you have this right-based discourse is coming in. So when we say equality, it is this right. When you think about right, remember one thing here. Right is also a claim and assertion. You are supposed to, it's not an abstract concept. When you say, I have a right, it should have a concrete manifestation. You say, I have a right to wear jeans. I have a right to lead the funeral prayer of my father, even if I'm a girl. Am I making sense? So this is a right. So it must have a manifest, concrete, behavioral form. It's not an abstract idea. So it's a right-based discourse. Today we live in a world of right-based discourse. Now, if you understood these three things now, what happened to the idea of nation-state? And what is the challenge that we have on globalization? I'll give 2 or 3 points and I'll wind it out. First of all, Arvind has rightly pointed out, nation-state is not indigenous. It doesn't come from India. It comes from the West. Okay? In fact, Ashish Nandi is well known. He's a political psychologist, those of you who don't know. In his small book called Illegitimacy of Nationalism, he makes this wonderful point. He says, the idea of nation-state came to India, he didn't use the word India, he said in South Asia, riding piggyback on colonial imperial expansion. It has come along with that. Idea is foreign to us. Okay? Now this is again rooted in French Declaration, nation and state, the fusion of the two. Otherwise, state is different, nation is different. Okay? That has a long story. I just wanted to tell you that nation idea itself is alien to this country. When we say nation, we tend to translate it as Rashtra. It's not Rashtra. One classic example for you is the irony of our country is these two things. Rabindranath Tagore, we call it national poet, isn't it? We sing the song he wrote. He was against the very idea of nation. The irony is that the guy who was against the idea of nation and nationalism, we call it national poet. And another guy who was very, very skeptical, in fact, not only skeptical, he doesn't like it, he thinks it's full of violence, an institution called state. You know who's this guy? Mahatma Gandhi. In a roundtable conference, when a British journalist asked him, you know, what kind of India you have in your dream? It's 1930s. He said, dream of my India will be a country with the smallest imaginable army. India today has the second largest army in the world, and we still call him Gandhi, the father of the nation. That's the irony of this country. A guy who did not like the idea of state has become the father of this modern nation state. And a guy who was so skeptical about nationalism, in fact, Tagore never translated the word nation into any of the Indian languages. Whenever he writes in Bengali, he always writes nation. He doesn't even bother to translate, just to make a point that this is not ours. The vocabulary is alien to us. So if you think that what globalization has done is this one example. Your worldview that today you think in terms of nation state, you forget that it is coming from outside, and you said, you know, in contrast to the West, you will still think about it. IPC, Indian Penal Code, through which you define all your laws of criminality, is shaped by the British in 1860. And it continues to rule us. This is called regime dependent principles rather than citizen dependent. In the West, in Britain, you know, when the laws were developed, it is to protect the citizens. Okay? It is not to protect the rulers. In India, they introduced this in 1860s, and it continues to be. That's why Indian police is very good in controlling riots and beating up protesters rather than doing criminal investigations. And you have VIP protection more important than protecting you. It is a systemic. I'm not the only one who's saying that. There are police officers who have tried to change this. There are police commissions, there have been police reform, they have been asking constantly, you know, to change our ethos. So these are some of the things that how globalization from the past, we continue to do this one. Huh? Now, if I have said this, one more idea. Look at this. You know this Bharat Mata, we keep on shouting Bharat Mata ki Jai. If you look at Nehru's discovery of India, there was one interesting paragraph in that book. He said, whenever I go, people receive me with this slogan called Bharat Mata ki Jai. And one day he asked, what is this Bharat Mata that you are shouting? He said, there was a silence. Then suddenly a Jat fellow, according to Nehru, married to the soil, got up and said like this, Ye dharti. Huh? Then Nehru said, Ye aapka kheti ka dharti, aapka mohalla ka dharti, province ka dharti, which dharti you are talking about? The guy kept quiet. Then Nehru says, Bharat Mata is you, Bharat Mata is me, Bharat Mata is him. Each one of us is Bharat Mata. It's not outside of us. That's the liberal principles. You know, my colleague, former colleague, Dipankar Gupta says, we should have said rather than we the people, people become something abstract, nation becomes something abstract beyond us. Okay? It should have been we coming together is what we are. So he said, we the citizens. This is a liberal concept which you find in Nehru and so on. Now, in the name of the nation, individual can be now civilians and, you know, destroy. These are part of the Western nation state model, which is exactly what Tagore and Gandhi were very, very skeptical of. So if you think that what is the challenge of our nation state, we wanted to free our mind from this one, how far you are able to do is, that is why I said I'll talk about agency. What is the agency that we have to free ourselves from these ideas? The last one, when the globalization happened, equality appears in a very peculiar form. Most of the technologies are in the hands of the Western countries. Most of the capitals are in the hands of the global countries. So when we say a community of states or, you know, peoples in the world, do we have the same capacity to exercise the right? Will they dictate terms on us? Ye kar, nahi to paisa nahi dunga. Look at how China is doing to Pakistan. Pakistan hate India so much, you know, their own hatred is destroying themselves. The Chinese is going to play games with them. Billions of dollars they can't pay back. Jo China kahega, wo karega bhi. See, this is what I'm saying in globalized format. The global capital, the Japanese, the Americans, and Western companies have it. Remember, within us also, how many, you know, you must have read in newspaper. Which percentage of the wealth are concentrated on which percentage of the population? Less than 5% of the population has more than 60–70% of the wealth of the entire country. You have people who can't afford. Now, when we think about psychology, globalization impact, similarly, you think both within and without. When you deal with India and rest of the country, rest of the world, when we think we are globalized, we can't be just simply silent, because what is our position? What is our right, our power to negotiate in the light of the fact that a lot of global capital and powerful people are there? So what could be the parameters that globally we can shape is a challenge. Two, within the country, in the name of this borrowed idea of nation, what are you going to do? You're going to flatten people? In the name of the nation, You're going to, it's like sexuality defined by patriarchy. Under the sexuality defined by patriarchy, virginity kiske liye important hai? For the girls. Loyalty has to be proven by the girls. It is defined within the sexuality of female sexuality, defined to patriarchy. Any literature in feminists will tell you that. Once you have defined like this, the burden of proving loyalty, burden of preserving, that's why if I say bluntly, if you remember the controversy during this Swara Bhaskar's take on Padma, that movie, remember? Rani, what is it? Padma. You remember that article by Swara Bhaskar? He said, sir, at the end of the film, I feel that you have reduced me to my vagina, which is either to be possessed or protected. But my life is more than this. That's why, once the patriarchy defines a particular sexuality like that, rape ki baat, Hindi movie will show you in the earlier times, and you will think that your ijjat chala gaya, I have to commit suicide, my life is over. It's like 12 pass nahi kar paya, the student kill himself without realizing that life is not equal to exam. So like this, you have a particular definition of a nation from the West, and I have already told you that it is a literature available for you. Tagore, Gandhi, how they were, both of them are skeptical, and it is a Western-centric idea. What is that India can define? What is our own imagination? In fact, Partho Chatterjee asked this question. If the West has already imagined the idea of nation, is it that we have to only borrow and try to find which model fit us? Or is there any other way of imagining ourselves? But the notion of a one language, one nation, is again, it's a Western idea. It comes from a German Romanticist tradition by J.G. Hudder's idea, which says folk which speaks a common language constitute a nation. And interestingly, Sanskrit Commission Report 1956, as well as the Directive Principle Article 351, shows us that this Western idea haunts us as a nation. There is a slight hand of linguistic nationalism in India. That's why people will react. Remember, in the name of religion, this subcontinent was divided into Pakistan and India. Majority of the supporters of Muslim looks were from the present-day Bangladesh. Second highest was Awadh region. The least was the present-day Pakistan. The country was created. After some time, they wanted to impose Urdu as a national language. Bengalis resisted. Bangladesh became a reality. When you pursue this kind of a flattening of politics, borrowed ideas from the West, rather than trying to evolve our own ways of agency of imagining as a collective, when you have that, you face this challenge. That is exactly what we have it, to my mind, both in terms of power relation with the external forces, like especially the Western countries or countries like Japan and China, economically and militarily more powerful. In the name of we are all one in the global village, we cannot simply surrender our agency. We have to find our own interests. Second, many of the borrowed ideas from the past as well as present continues to haunt us, and how we negotiate with that is that particular aspect. For psychologists, it's high time to see, as Professor Tripathi has already said, rethinking many of these theories, which is again rooted in certain historically specific cultural contexts in the West particularly, and try to see a new way, and can it help in rejuvenating this notion of agency, of capacity to create meaning for ourselves, to conduct ourselves. That's the broader challenge that I see, both in terms of globalization. By the way, when you write Indian societies, there are already debate in sociology and others. Indian state is singular. People say society in India is not singular. There are Indian societies. A Bengali society is different from a Tamil society, and so on and so forth. But Indian state is one. We have one constitution, we have one rule, we have one country. But society is plural. So people talk about Indian histories in history. There's a debate in subaltern history. They said rather than saying Indian history, we should be talking about histories of India. And a similar ways among sociologists, people started talking about Indian societies. That itself is a capacity to understand why we can deal with diversity under what parameters. These are broadly the ideas that I feel that we can reflect on it. Thank you so much.